Before I tell you what really happens on Cadillac Mountain before sunrise, I need you to understand something about this place. Most tourists know it as the first place in the United States to see the sunrise from October through March. They know it's the highest point on the East Coast. They know it's beautiful, but they don't know that Cadillac Mountain doesn't sleep. They don't know that when the sun goes down and the tourists leave, something else wakes up. Something that's been here far longer than the park, far longer than humans. Are you watching this late at night? Maybe you're planning a trip to Acadia and want to watch the sunrise from the summit. Let me know in the comments. Because if you've ever stood on that bare granite summit at 4 in the morning and felt the rock beneath your feet tremble for reasons unrelated to wind or geology, you need to hear this story. What I'm about to tell you could save your life. My name is Liam Torres, and I've been working as a park ranger at Acadia National Park for 5 years. I mostly work at night and in the early morning hours, so I'm responsible for Mount Cadillac while most people are asleep. Over the past 5 years, I've responded to 18 emergency calls on the mountain, evacuated dozens of people before sudden storms, and conducted 7 rescue operations for lost hikers. And 6 months ago, I lost 9 tourists in an incident officially reported as a tragic mass disorientation event that caused multiple people to fall from the summit. But I know that's not what happened, because I found their shoes. All 18 pairs of shoes were arranged in a perfect circle on the observation deck at the summit, but no one was there. There were no bodies at the bottom of the cliff. There was no trace of where they had gone, only empty shoes and the sound of the mountain breathing beneath my feet. Let me start at the beginning, 6 months ago, on what should have been a routine sunrise tour. It was late October, peak fall foliage season in Maine. Cadillac Mountain gets hundreds of sunrise viewers every morning during this time, people who drive up the 3.5-mile summit road in darkness to catch first light from the highest point on the coast. Most come in their own vehicles, but some book guided tours with local companies who provide transportation and interpretation. On October 27th, a tour company called First Light Adventures had a group of 9 people scheduled for the 4:30 a.m. sunrise. Christine Vale was the guide, a woman I'd worked with dozens of times. She was 38, had been leading sunrise tours for over a decade, knew Cadillac Mountain better than most rangers. She'd done this exact tour over 200 times without incident. At 3:45 a.m., she checked in with me at the base of the summit road. Standard protocol. "Morning, Torres. Got 9 for sunrise. Weather looks clear. Should be a good show." "Copy that. Roads are clear. Summit temp is 38 degrees. Light wind. Enjoy the view." "Thanks. See you on the way down." Her van headed up the winding road. I watched the headlights snake through the darkness, climbing toward the bare granite summit 1,500 feet above sea level. At 4 a.m., they should have reached the parking area. At 4:15, they should have been positioned at the observation deck. At 4:38, sunrise would occur. At 4:50 a.m., when they should have been heading back down, I got a radio call. But it wasn't from Christine. It was from Tom Whitley, the maintenance worker who'd been clearing the summit parking area. "Liam, you need to get up here. Now. Something's wrong. The van is here, but I can't find anyone. And there's..." His voice cracked. "There's something wrong with the mountain." It's making sounds. Like breathing. Like something huge is breathing underneath the rock. I was in my truck immediately, racing up the summit road. The drive takes 15 minutes normally. I made it in 9. The sun was just starting to paint the eastern horizon orange as I reached the summit parking area. Tom's maintenance truck was there. Christine's tour van was there. But no people. I grabbed my flashlight and radio and headed to the observation deck, the large paved area where everyone gathers to watch the sunrise. That's where I found them. The shoes, 18 of them, 9 pairs, arranged in a perfect circle about 20 feet in diameter. Hiking boots, sneakers, 1 pair of sandals, all empty, all positioned with the toes pointing inward toward the center of the circle. Tom was standing at the edge of the parking area, staring at the granite beneath his feet with an expression I'd never seen on him before. Pure terror. "You feel it?" he asked without looking up. "The vibration. The rhythm. It's breathing. The whole goddamn mountain is breathing." I knelt down and put my hand on the rock, and he was right. There was a vibration, subtle but unmistakable, a rhythmic pulse that rose and fell like the chest of something enormous drawing breath. And with each pulse, I felt something else. A pull, like the stone wanted me to step into that circle of shoes, wanted me to join whatever had happened to the 9 tourists. I stood up quickly, fighting the compulsion. "Tom, get back to your truck. Radio for backup. All available units. And call the state police." He didn't argue, just walked quickly back to his vehicle, his eyes never leaving the ground like he was afraid the mountain would open up and swallow him if he looked away. I approached the circle carefully, documenting everything with my camera. The shoes were arranged too precisely to be accidental. Someone or something had placed them deliberately. But there were no footprints leading away, no scuff marks, no signs of struggle. Just empty shoes on bare granite and that horrible rhythmic pulse beneath my feet. I radioed for Christine. "Vale, this is Torres. Respond, please. We have your vehicle at the summit but can't locate your group." Static. Then, faintly, underneath the static, something else. A voice. Not Christine's voice, exactly. Too deep, too resonant, speaking words in a language I didn't recognize. And beneath the words, that breathing sound. Slow, deep, ancient. The sun broke over the horizon. Full daylight flooded the summit, and with the light, the vibration stopped. The breathing sound ceased. The compulsion to step into the circle vanished. Cadillac Mountain became just a mountain again. Beautiful granite. Stunning views. Completely normal. But the shoes remained. And 9 people were gone. Search and rescue deployed within an hour. Over the next 3 days, they covered every inch of Cadillac Mountain. Helicopter thermal imaging. Ground teams. Dive teams checking the surrounding waters in case they'd somehow gone over the cliffs. They found nothing. The official investigation concluded that the group had experienced some form of mass psychological event. Carbon monoxide from the van, perhaps. Hallucinations. Disorientation. That they'd wandered off the mountain in different directions and succumbed to exposure. That bodies would be found eventually in the dense forest surrounding the summit. But 6 months later, no bodies had been recovered. And I'd heard that voice on the radio. That language that wasn't human. That breathing sound that came from beneath the mountain itself. I started investigating on my own, went through park records looking for similar incidents, and I found a pattern that made my blood run cold. Since Acadia became a national park in 1919, there had been 37 unexplained disappearances from Cadillac Mountain, all between October and March, the months when sunrise occurs earliest and tourists arrive in darkness, all between 4 a.m. and 5 a.m., that window before full daylight, all from the summit observation area. And in 12 of the cases, shoes had been found, arranged in circles, always with toes pointing inward. The disappearances went back even further than the park's existence. Town records from Bar Harbor mentioned people vanishing from the mountain in the 1800s. And before that, there were stories from the Wabanaki people who'd lived on Mount Desert Island for thousands of years. They had a name for Cadillac Mountain. They called it Pemetic, which meant the sloping land. But they also had another name, one that was only spoken in certain contexts, Wocawson, the mountain that breathes. I needed to talk to someone who knew these stories, someone from the Wabanaki community who could explain what their ancestors understood about this mountain. After making some calls through park cultural liaisons, I was connected to an elder named Joseph Francis, a member of the Penobscot Nation who'd grown up hearing the old stories about Mount Desert Island. We met at his home in Old Town, about an hour north of Acadia. He was 73, retired teacher, keeper of traditional knowledge. He listened patiently as I explained what had happened. The disappearances, the shoes, the breathing sound. And he nodded slowly, like none of this surprised him. "Pemetic has always been alive," he said simply. "Not alive like an animal. Alive like the earth itself. It's a thin place, a doorway between the world we see and the world that exists beneath the stone. And at certain times, when the conditions are right, that doorway opens." What's beneath the stone? The old stories say there are beings that live deep in the earth. Ancient things that were here before the ice. Before the mountains rose. They sleep most of the time. But they wake during certain seasons, during certain hours. And when they wake, they hunger. Not for food, for something else. For consciousness. For awareness. For the spark that makes humans human. You're saying the mountain ate those tourists? Not the mountain. What lives beneath it? The entity that Pemetic is built upon. It doesn't eat in the way you're thinking. It absorbs. It pulls people down into the stone, takes them into the spaces between rock, and there they remain, conscious but trapped, aware but unable to move or speak or escape, feeding the hunger of something vast and ancient that exists beneath our world. The similarity to what I'd learned about the redwood canopy dwellers was striking. Different locations, different mechanisms, but the same horror. People trapped in living structures, conscious and aware, unable to escape. How do we stop it? How do we protect people? You don't stop it. You respect it. You honor the old boundaries. He pulled out a map. Not a modern park map. An old hand-drawn map showing Mount Desert Island as it had been centuries ago. On it, Cadillac Mountain was marked with symbols. Our ancestors knew not to go to the summit in darkness. They knew the hours when Pemetic breathes. When the doorway opens, they avoided those times, only went up during full daylight, and they never, ever stayed on the summit overnight. The Park Service encourages sunrise viewing. We have people going up at 4 a.m. every morning during peak season. Then people will continue to disappear. Because you've built viewing platforms right on top of the doorway, you've marked it with pavement and railings and made it easy for tourists to stand in exactly the spot where the mountain breathes, where it pulls people down. Is there a way to close the doorway? To seal it? He shook his head. It's not a physical door. It's a thinning of reality, a weakness in the boundary between worlds, and it's been there since before humans existed. You can't seal it any more than you can seal a crack in the fabric of space itself. I left his house with more questions than answers, but I also had confirmation. The mountain was alive in some sense I didn't fully understand. It breathed, it hungered, and at specific times, it claimed people. Over the next few weeks, I became obsessed with understanding the pattern. I analyzed every disappearance, charted the dates and times, looked for correlations with lunar phases, tides, geological activity, and I found something. The disappearances occurred most frequently during new moons, when darkness was deepest, when tourists needed flashlights to navigate the summit, and they occurred in a cluster pattern. Multiple years with no incidents. Then suddenly, 3 or 4 disappearances in a single season. It was like the mountain had cycles, periods of dormancy when the doorway was sealed or the entity beneath was sleeping. followed by periods of activity when it woke hungry and began pulling victims down. And according to my analysis, we were entering another active period. The Christine Vale incident was the first of what would likely be several over the next few months. I took my findings to Robert Caldwell, the park superintendent. He was 63, 27 years at Acadia, planning to retire soon. He listened to my presentation with an expression that slowly shifted from skepticism to recognition. "You figured it out," he said when I finished. "What we've all known but can't officially acknowledge. You know about the mountain? About what it does? Every superintendent has known since the park was established. It's part of the unofficial transfer of knowledge when you take over. The mountain breathes. The summit is dangerous during pre-dawn hours in late fall and winter. People disappear. We do what we can to mitigate risk without causing panic." He pulled out a file. "This contains every report, every incident, every observation going back to 1919. It's yours now, because you're going to be the one managing this going forward." "Why me?" "Because you're the one who works overnights, the one who'll be on the mountain during the dangerous hours, and because you're the one who cares enough to investigate instead of just accepting the official explanations." He opened the file. "Here's what we know for certain. The danger window is 4 a.m. to 5:15 a.m. from October 1st through March 31st. During those hours, the summit observation deck should be closed. But we can't officially close it because we'd need to explain why. So instead, we discourage early arrival. We delay road opening when possible. We position rangers to turn people back before they reach the summit." That didn't save Christine's group. No, because sometimes the pull is too strong. Sometimes the mountain hungers badly enough that it reaches out further than usual, pulls people in even when rangers are present. He looked at me seriously. "You asked how to protect people. The truth is you can't protect everyone. Some will be taken no matter what we do. All we can do is minimize the risk, reduce the opportunities, and document what happens for the next person who will take over when we're gone. There has to be more we can do. Some way to warn people properly. If we issue specific warnings about supernatural entities beneath the mountain, we lose credibility. If we close the summit during prime sunrise hours without justification, we face lawsuits and political pressure. We're trapped between what we know is true and what we can officially acknowledge." He handed me the file. "Do what you can within those constraints. Save who you can, and accept that some losses are inevitable." I left his office with the weight of responsibility crushing down on me. I was now the keeper of Cadillac Mountain's dark secret, the one who had to stand between tourists and something ancient and hungry. Knowing I couldn't save everyone. Knowing that despite my best efforts, people would continue to disappear into the stone. 2 weeks later, we had another incident. A photographer who'd hiked up alone to catch sunrise. His camera was found at the observation deck, still on its tripod, still pointing at the eastern horizon. But the photographer was gone. His boots stood in the exact center of where Christine's group's shoes had formed a circle. Like the mountain was marking the spot. Like it wanted us to know exactly where the doorway opened. I was there within minutes of the call, and as I approached the boots, I felt it again. That vibration, that breathing, and something else. A sound like whispering coming from beneath the stone. Voices, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all talking at once in languages I didn't understand. I put my hand on the granite, and for just a moment I felt them. The people the mountain had taken, not dead, not gone, still there, still conscious, trapped in spaces between stone, existing in some impossible dimension where rock and reality overlapped. Christine was there. I recognized her voice somehow, calling out. Not for help. She was beyond help. but calling out a warning. Don't let them come at sunrise. The mountain is awake. The mountain is always awake. I pulled my hand back from the stone, my heart racing. The voices faded. The vibration continued its slow, rhythmic pulse, and I understood with horrible clarity what Joseph had meant. These people weren't dead. They were fuel. Their consciousness, their awareness, their very sense of being was feeding something vast and incomprehensible that existed beneath the mountain. Sophia found me standing there 10 minutes later, staring at the photographer's boots. She was my partner for the morning shift, 32 years old, 7 years of experience, and one of the few rangers who didn't dismiss my theories as paranoia. Another one? She asked quietly. Yeah, same pattern, same location, same time window. I looked at her. I heard them, Sophia. I put my hand on the rock, and I heard all of them. Everyone the mountain's taken. They're still there, still aware, trapped in the stone. That's not possible. I know it's not possible. But it's true. I showed her my hand. The palm was covered in tiny scratches, like the granite had tried to hold on when I pulled away. The mountain is alive. And it's hungry. And we have tourists coming up here every morning during the exact hours when it feeds. She looked at the boots, at the perfect positioning, at the empty space where a person should be. What do? We close the summit. Officially, right now. 4 a.m. to 6 a.m., October through March, no exceptions. On what grounds? I don't care. Make something up. Geological instability, wildlife management, anything. We can't keep letting people disappear. We spent the next 3 days lobbying Robert and the park administration, presented safety data, incident reports, weather statistics, everything we could think of that didn't mention ancient entities beneath the mountain, and finally, reluctantly, they agreed to a pilot program. Starting November 1st, Cadillac Summit Road would remain closed until 5:30 a.m. from November through February. Sunrise viewers would be encouraged to watch from lower elevations or arrive later. The official reason was road safety during the darkest months. It wasn't perfect. We'd still have people hiking up the trails in darkness. Still have photographers who'd find ways to reach the summit before official opening. But it would reduce the number of potential victims during the peak danger hours. The new policy went into effect, and for 3 weeks, it worked. No disappearances, no incidents. The mountain breathed its slow rhythm every morning, but with fewer people present during the critical hours, it couldn't claim any victims. Then came November 23rd, the night before Thanksgiving. A group of college students decided to do a sunrise hike up the North Ridge Trail, bypassing the closed summit road entirely. 5 of them, all experienced hikers, all with proper gear and lights. They reached the summit at 4:45 a.m., according to the timestamp on their last social media post. A selfie at the observation deck, all 5 students grinning at the camera with the dark Atlantic Ocean behind them. The caption read, "First Light Crew." #Cadillac Mountain, #sunrise, #Acadia National Park. When a family arrived at 6 a.m. after the road opened, they found 5 phones on the observation deck, all still on, all showing the same photo, but no students. And no shoes this time, just the phones arranged in a line pointing toward the center of the observation area where I'd seen the circles before. I was off duty that morning, trying to spend Thanksgiving with my family in Portland. But Sophia called me at 7 a.m. with the news. I was back in the park by 9, standing at the summit, staring at those 5 phones and feeling like a failure. "We closed the road," Sophia said. "We did everything we could within policy." They hiked around the closure. What more could we have done? We could have told them the truth. Put up signs explaining exactly what happens here, warning them that the mountain takes people. and lose our jobs, lose all credibility, get labeled as crazy, then who would be here to try to protect the next group? She was right, but it didn't make me feel any better. 5 more people trapped in the stone, 5 more voices added to the chorus beneath the mountain, 5 more families who would spend the rest of their lives wondering what happened to their children. The investigation played out like all the others. Massive search, no bodies found. Official conclusion of disorientation and falls. Families left with questions and grief. And me standing on the summit every morning, feeling that pulse beneath my feet, hearing those whispers, knowing the truth but unable to speak it. After the college students disappeared, I started spending more time on the summit during the dangerous hours. Not with tourists present. Alone. Trying to understand the pattern more deeply. Trying to figure out if there was any way to communicate with the entity beneath the mountain or to rescue the people it had taken. One morning in early December, I arrived at 4 a.m. and positioned myself at the observation deck. The night was clear and cold, temperature in the teens, wind minimal. Perfect conditions for sunrise viewing if we'd allowed people up. I sat on the granite and waited. At 4:15, right on schedule, I felt it begin. The vibration, the breathing, slow and deep and impossibly vast. Like the entire mountain was the chest of something enormous drawing breath. I put both hands flat on the stone and closed my eyes, tried to open myself to whatever existed beneath. And this time, instead of just hearing whispers, I felt something respond. An awareness. Ancient. Alien. Utterly inhuman but somehow conscious. It noticed me. I felt its attention focus like a spotlight swinging to illuminate a dark corner. And in that moment, I understood what Joseph had meant about the doorway. It wasn't a physical opening. It was attention itself. When the entity woke and became aware of people on the summit, when it focused its consciousness upward toward the surface, that focus created a weakness in reality, a thinning of the boundary. And people caught in that spotlight of attention got pulled through. Images flooded my mind. Not pictures, more like memories that weren't mine. I saw Cadillac Mountain before it was a mountain. Saw it as part of the seafloor millions of years ago. Saw the entity even then, existing in deep ocean trenches, feeding on the consciousness of ancient marine life. Saw the land rise as tectonic forces pushed the seafloor upward, creating the island. Saw the entity remain, buried beneath rock, sleeping for millions of years. Saw it wake periodically when the conditions were right. When humans came to the highest point of the new island and stood directly above where it slept, when their awareness and consciousness created ripples it could sense, when it could reach up through stone and pull that consciousness down to feed upon. I saw the people it had taken, not their bodies, their minds, their sense of self, trapped in a space that shouldn't exist. A pocket dimension where the entities stored consciousness like food in a larder. Hundreds of people going back centuries, all still aware, all still experiencing existence, but without bodies, without the ability to communicate or move or do anything except think and remember and slowly go mad. And I saw what would happen to me if I stayed in contact much longer. Saw the entity's attention beginning to pull, felt the stone beneath me starting to soften. Felt myself beginning to sink like I was sitting on something semi-liquid instead of solid granite. I yanked my hands away and scrambled backward. The sensation of sinking stopped immediately. The stone was solid again, but I'd felt it. That moment of transition. That instant when reality thinned enough that solid rock became permeable and something beneath could reach through. I understood now why the shoes were always left behind. The entity pulled consciousness and flesh but couldn't take inanimate objects. The victims were absorbed through the stone, but their clothes and belongings remained on the surface. and the circular arrangements weren't deliberate positioning by the entity. They were the natural result of people being pulled from different positions, their shoes left behind to mark where they'd been standing when the doorway opened beneath them. Over the next few weeks, I documented everything I'd experienced, wrote detailed reports that I kept in a personal file, knowing I could never submit them officially, drew diagrams of the observation deck marking the exact spots where shoes had been found, charted the timing of disappearances against lunar phases, geological activity, anything that might help predict when the entity was most active. And I found another pattern. The disappearances clustered around specific dates: November 27th, December 18th, January 9th, February 2nd, about 3 weeks apart. The pattern repeated every year with occasional variations. I showed my findings to Joseph Francis during a second visit to his home. He studied my charts and nodded slowly. The old stories mention cycles, times when the breathing was strongest. Your dates match the traditional periods when our ancestors avoided the summit. He traced his finger across my timeline. These aren't random. They're tied to the entity's metabolism. Every 3 weeks, it wakes from deeper sleep, becomes more active, hungers more intensely. That's when it reaches up most strongly. So we can predict the most dangerous dates. Increase patrols, keep people away specifically during those windows. You can try. But the entity is learning too, adapting. You've closed the road, so it's reaching further, pulling people from the trails. And eventually, as it gets stronger, as it accumulates more consciousness to feed on, it will be able to reach even during daylight hours. The boundary will thin enough that people won't be safe at any time. You're saying it's getting worse. It's always been growing. Slowly, over millennia. Each person it takes makes it stronger, gives it more awareness to work with. Your park has brought it more food in 100 years than it consumed in the previous 10,000. You're feeding it, teaching it, making it powerful enough to eventually break through completely. The implication was terrifying. If the entity continued to grow, if it kept accumulating consciousness and awareness from its victims, eventually it might be strong enough to reach up during normal hours, to pull people down in broad daylight with witnesses present, to break the last barriers between its dimension and ours. How do we stop it? How do we weaken it? You'd need to free the consciousness it's holding, release the people it's trapped. But they're not in a place you can reach. They're in the spaces between stone, in a dimension that only exists where the entity's awareness creates it. He looked at me seriously. The only people who could possibly reach them are those who've been partially pulled, who've touched the stone when the doorway was opening and felt themselves beginning to sink. Like me. When I'd sat on the observation deck and put my hands on the granite and felt myself starting to be absorbed. I'd pulled away in time, but I'd crossed the threshold. I'd felt the transition beginning, which meant I might be able to cross it deliberately, to enter that impossible space where the victims were trapped, to potentially free them. But it would require going back to the summit during the dangerous hours, putting myself in position to be taken, and trusting that I could somehow control the process enough to enter that dimension without being completely absorbed, that I could maintain enough connection to the physical world to pull myself back out. You're thinking about it, Joseph said, about trying to enter the entity's dimension and free the trapped people. Don't. You won't succeed. The entity has been doing this for millions of years. It's learned how to hold consciousness perfectly, how to prevent escape. You'd just become another victim, another voice in the stone. But someone has to try. We can't just keep letting it take people. Then find another way. Weaken it without confronting it directly. Starve it by keeping people away from the summit during its active periods. Eventually, if it goes long enough without feeding, It will return to deeper sleep. The danger will reduce. I returned to Acadia with Joseph's warnings echoing in my mind. But I couldn't accept that our only option was passive defense, that we had to let the entity keep the people it had already taken while trying to prevent new victims. There had to be a way to fight back, to rescue the trapped consciousness, to weaken the thing beneath the mountain. Sophia found me in my office 3 days later, staring at topographic maps and geological surveys of Cadillac Mountain. "You're planning something stupid, aren't you?" Define stupid. Anything that involves you deliberately getting grabbed by the mountain entity. I looked up. "How did you know?" "Because I know you. Because you've been obsessing over this since Christine disappeared. And because I saw the scratches on your hand from when you touched the stone." She sat down across from me. "You can't save them, Liam. Whatever that thing is, wherever it's keeping people, you can't reach them. You'll just end up trapped too." "Maybe. But at least I'll know I tried. At least I'll have done something instead of just documenting disappearances and feeling helpless." "And what about the people who depend on you here? What about the next group of tourists who come up during the dangerous hours and need a ranger who understands what's really happening to warn them away?" She grabbed my hand. "You dying doesn't help anyone. You trapped in the stone doesn't help anyone. We need you here, in this world, fighting from this side." She was right. I knew she was right. But the guilt was eating me alive. Every morning I felt that pulse beneath the summit. Every morning I heard those whispers. Christine's voice, the college students, the photographer, hundreds of others going back decades or centuries, all crying out, all trapped, all depending on someone to help them. But I couldn't help them, not without becoming one of them. And if I did that, there would be no one left who truly understood what Cadillac Mountain was. No one to pass on the knowledge. No one to protect future victims. So I made a different choice. I doubled down on prevention, created an unofficial warning system for tour companies and hiking groups, trained every ranger at Acadia on the patterns, even if I couldn't explain the real cause. Positioned myself on the summit every morning during the dangerous hours, not to confront the entity, but to turn people away before they reached the observation deck. It wasn't enough. We still lost people. A hiker in January, 2 photographers in February. Each time I felt like I'd failed. Each time I heard their voices join the chorus beneath the stone. Each time the entity grew a little stronger. But we also saved people, turned away dozens of early arrivals, convinced tour companies to schedule later departures, convinced hundreds of tourists that watching sunrise from Jordan Pond or Sand Beach was just as beautiful as the summit view. Every person who didn't disappear was a small victory. Every morning the entity went unfed was a step toward driving it back into dormancy. Spring came. The dangerous season ended. April 1st marked the shift to later sunrises that occurred after the entity's active window. Cadillac Mountain became safe again for normal hours. The summit road opened earlier. Tourists flooded back to watch sunrise from the highest point on the East Coast. And for 6 months, there were no disappearances, no incidents, no voices added to the chorus beneath the stone. The entity slept, or at least became dormant. The mountain breathed its slow rhythm, but didn't reach up to claim victims. I used those months to refine my understanding, to document everything more thoroughly, to create a comprehensive guide for future rangers about the real dangers of Cadillac Mountain, and to meet regularly with Joseph, learning everything he could teach me about the old stories and traditional knowledge. "You're building something," he said during one visit. "A defense system based on understanding and respect rather than confrontation. That's the right approach. The only approach that has any chance of long-term success. But it doesn't save the people already trapped. No, it doesn't. And that's a grief you'll carry forever." He looked at me with eyes that had seen much suffering. But sometimes the best we can do is prevent new suffering. Sometimes accepting that we can't fix the past is necessary to protect the future. Now it's late September again. The dangerous season is about to begin. In 2 weeks, sunrise times will shift back into the entity's active window. The mountain will wake hungry after 6 months of dormancy. And I'll be there, standing between tourists and something ancient and vast, doing what I can to prevent the next disappearance. I still hear them sometimes. When I'm alone on the summit early in the morning, when I put my hand on the granite, I hear the voices. Christine is still there, still aware, still trapped. She doesn't call for rescue anymore. She's accepted her fate. But she still warns, still tries to protect others from joining her. "Keep them away," she whispers through the stone. "Don't let anyone come during the breathing hours." The mountain is always awake, always hungry, always watching. And I will. I'll do everything I can within the constraints of what I'm allowed to say officially. I'll train rangers. I'll turn away early arrivals. I'll position myself on the summit during every dangerous morning, feeling that pulse beneath my feet, fighting the pull, staying in this world so I can protect others from leaving it. Because someone has to stand guard. Someone has to know the truth and use that knowledge to save whoever can be saved. And someone has to carry the memory of all those who were lost, keeping their names and stories alive, even if their bodies remain trapped in impossible spaces beneath the stone. If you're planning to visit Acadia National Park, if you want to catch sunrise from Cadillac Mountain, I'm not going to tell you not to go. It's beautiful. It's meaningful. Millions of people have watched the sunrise from that summit safely. Just don't arrive before 5:30 a.m. between October and March. Don't hike up in darkness during those months. Don't stand on the observation deck during the breathing hours when the mountain wakes and the entity beneath reaches up toward consciousness. Because Cadillac Mountain doesn't sleep. Not really. It only rests. And when it wakes, when you feel that vibration beneath your feet and hear that slow, deep rhythm like breathing, you need to leave. Immediately. Don't wait. Don't investigate. Just get off the summit and down to lower elevation where the stone is thicker and the entity's reach doesn't extend. And if you hear voices from the rock, if you put your hand on the granite and feel whispers of people calling out, don't try to help them. You can't. They're beyond reach in a dimension that only exists in the entity's awareness. All you can do is remember they're there, honor their loss, and make sure you don't join them. The mountain is always awake. The mountain is always watching. And the mountain is always hungry. But as long as someone stands guard, as long as someone knows the truth and uses it to turn people away during the dangerous hours, at least we can limit the feeding. At least we can protect some of the people some of the time. And maybe someday, if we keep people away long enough, if we starve it sufficiently, the entity will return to deeper sleep. The doorway will seal more completely, and Cadillac Mountain will become just a mountain again. But until that day comes, I'll be there every morning, standing on that granite summit, feeling that pulse beneath my feet, hearing those voices from the stone, doing what I can to prevent the next disappearance. Because someone has to.